already excited about what we're talking about just next week, let alone the entire series. And so I just want to let you guys know about that. We're in this last part of a thing of vision where it's all about less self, less about ourselves. And the reason, again, we've unfolded the series this way is because today we're going to talk about it. Tonight we're going to talk about kind of what the future holds, what we feel like God's calling us to do, what kind of church we feel like God's calling us to be. But in the middle of that, we kind of wanted to, well, not kind of wanted to, we wanted to create a clarity that who God's called us to be as a church is simply an outer working of who God is to us. And said differently, it's not, here's this vision, here's this thing that we feel like God's calling us to do, this crazy thing. It's this, here's this God who had this crazy amount of love for us, who so loved us, he gave everything for us in his son Jesus, and he served us in that way because us and ourselves, I mean, we're all sinful. We share this kind of common bond of sinfulness, of humanity. And the reality is God knew that. God saw that. God did not expect us to better our way into his good graces, right? What he did is he came for us to die for us. He paid the price that we couldn't pay because we couldn't make ourselves unholy, right? I mean, we all have sinned. But there's nobody in here who's not thinking like, yeah, I had a night. I had a weekend. Some of you were in Tampa and it was this weekend, right? Like, there's, yeah, some of you are like, oh my gosh, he just said that. Yes, he did. He knows. He sees Instagram, okay? So, right, like you know, you saw and you did and you had it circled on the calendar. And we all do this, right? You don't need to feel bad about it. You don't need to feel shame about it. It's the reality that we have all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And so Jesus knew that, and he should have rejected us. He should have cast us out. He should have said, no, I am too holy. But because of his love for us, Jesus on the cross was the payment that satisfied the wrath and the justice of God. And his selflessness displayed creates a selflessness inside of us, which is where Paul would say, based off of Jesus' kind of thoughts and words, where he said, even the Son of Man, even Jesus himself, I did not come to be served, but to serve and to give my life as a ransom for many. And Paul would say, so here's what we're to do as Christians. Do nothing out of selfish ambition and vain conceit, but in humility consider others better than yourself. Every room you walk into, look not to your own interests, but also to the interest of others. That we should have the same mindset of Christ Jesus. In other words, we should have the same mind of Jesus that was just simply about serving. And so then when we do that, there's a couple specific ways that we know God's called us to be selfless because they're kind of the closest to our heart, which is our calendar and our bank account. And so we're just going to look to God and say, God, you have everything. And so today, what we're going to talk about is what does that look like when the group of individuals individually live this out and come together? In other words, what does it look like when there's a church full of people who are saying yes to Jesus and I will go buy that blue Gatorade. Yes to Jesus and I will go have that difficult conversation. Yes to Jesus and I will walk in, I'm going to love and I'm going to serve them. I'm going to take the extra time. Even though it's not in the middle of my day and I've got 100 things going on, I'm going to say yes to Jesus in every moment. And so what does that look like when we not corporately only live this out, but individually live this out in such a way that we know that corporately, communally, there's things that we can do together that we can't do individually, right? There's just this sense of oneness. There's just this sense of sameness. There's just this sense of synergy. When people come together, we can do things that we wouldn't be able to do individually. And so vision is just kind of simply individuals living this out in a kind of an aggregate, total type of way. But there was a guy in the Old Testament who was our jumping off point tonight. His name's Nehemiah. If you've never heard of Nehemiah, then welcome to Downtown Community Church. He's my favorite dude in all of the Bible, sans Jesus, all right? Nehemiah, favorite book in the Old Testament. It's an incredible book, incredible leadership. The thing I love about it, honestly, is there's nothing crazy that happens, right? So much of the Bible you read, and it's like, and then an angel came down. You're like, of course it's the Bible, right? And then the sea parted, of course it's the Bible, right? And then this crazy, they could walk or they could see. Nehemiah, he built a wall. Nobody's like, what? My favorite book of the Bible. I know. But here's why. Because it did it in such a miraculous way, such an interesting way. In fact, the story goes a little bit like this. Backstory before that even happened. The people of God in the Old Testament was the nation of Israel, or the Jews. And they were God's chosen people. They were to be a people that were to be a light. That they would live in such a way, love in such a way, serve in such a way, worship in such a way, that they would be a group of people that every other nation would look at them and they'd say, that God must be the one true God, that they were supposed to basically display God in such a way. Well, the opposite happened. They did what we did. They just decided to not do that at times, and for extended period of times, and sometimes all the time. And so there's a bunch of prophets that came in. If you ever read the prophets in the Old Testament, you're thinking, what is this God? What is this God of war? It just seems like all he's talking about is you're going to get destroyed, you're going to get destroyed, you're going to get destroyed. And I don't know, but isn't this true? If God is God, and God loves his people, and he sees his people constantly rebelling, at some point God has to discipline. Just like a kid who you see at the mall. Well, nobody goes to the mall anymore. I don't know where we go publicly, honestly. I was going to say the grocery store, but we get Instacart. So you see at the trampoline park. I don't know. We went there today with our kids, right? So but they're just they're acting up and they're going crazy. And you're I don't know if you believe in spanking kids. I do if my kids act up enough. You know what I mean? So I'm just somebody needs to, in the name of Jesus, in a loving, corrective way, full of justice and grace, right? But you see that and you're thinking somebody needs to discipline that kid. Because any loving parent knows that that's a part of correction. Well, so the prophets were the ones who were saying, okay, God's serious about this. If you continue to do this, there's going to be consequences. If you continue to do this, and not because he's mad at you, not because he hates you. In fact, it's because he loves you that he wants to correct you. They didn't do it. And so you might have read about this in your Old Testament class or your history class. There was a number of people that came in. First thing that came in is the Assyrians came in. They took over the northern kingdom. The Babylonians beat the Assyrians on kind of the world's superpower stage. And the Babylonians came and took out the southern kingdom, Judah, where Jerusalem was. And in the Babylonian exile, where the Assyrians would come in and they would just kind of turn and burn and torch the whole place, the Babylonians were actually really smart. It's an interesting leadership principle. They would take the best and the brightest and they would export them to the most important places. It's where the Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego whole story comes into play. Daniel is in exile. Well, so then the Persians come and beat the Babylonians. And the Persians are now in power. And King Cyrus has this decree. Anyone who is a part of the Babylonian exile can now go home. And so initially there was two people who kind of led a movement back. One was a person by the name of Zerubbabel. That's a tongue twister, so don't try to do that one too many times too fast. But Zerubbabel led the people back, and they were going to build the temple of God, because when the Babylonians came in, they just torched the place. So they were going to build the temple back, and they started to build it back, and a little bit of a success. They built a foundation, and everybody, some people praised, and some people who had seen the previous temple, they kind of cried because they knew it was not even close to what it used to be, but it just kind of sputtered. And then Ezra came back. He was the priest, scribe, prophet. Ezra was the one who was supposed to come back and reinstate the law and say, here's the law of God, here's what God has to say, and it just kind of sputtered. And then we come to this person, Nehemiah. And Nehemiah is the cupbearer to the king. King Artaxerxes, which means that the most powerful person on the planet, and it wasn't even close. And not like presidential power, like he could say it's now daytime, and we'd be like, dang it, it's daytime right now. We got to start calling this darkness daytime. Like he could just flip it like that. He could do anything he wanted to whomever he wanted. And Nehemiah is his cupbearer, which means there's a tight relationship because Nehemiah tests the wine for the king. And probably his food too. So tons of trust built between these two. Well, one day Nehemiah hears word from some of his family about what's happening in Jerusalem and what's happening to the people who still survive, the remnant. Nehemiah chapter 1, verse 2. Hananiah, one of my brothers, came with certain men from Judah, and I asked them concerning the Jews who escaped, who had survived the exile, and concerning Jerusalem. And they said to me, the remnant there is in the province who had survived the exile. They are in great trouble and shame. They're saying, so there's a big problem. They're in actual trouble, but it's also a reputational problem. There's a lot of shame that's built around this. And this is the problem, that the wall of Jerusalem is broken down and its gates are destroyed by fire. Now, that might not sound like much of a problem to you or to me, because I don't know who's like, man, a tree fell on my back fence and it lies in ruins. And we're shameful about it. I'm like, dang it, But to them, this was massive. Because they lived at a time and in a context where walls were the lines of defense against anybody else, any warring parties, any other groups, any other kind of band of robbers that were going to come through. That if you didn't have walls, honestly, you might as well not have a city because you have no line of protection, nobody to defend yourself, especially at nighttime. And so why would we go repopulate? Why would we go re-inhabit? Why would we go rebuild this temple? Because we can't even... There's not even a wall up. And this had been maybe 100, maybe 70. It was at least 70, probably at least 100 years at this point in time. So he probably knew it. And this probably wasn't new information. But likely it was new or old information that hit him in a new way. And he comes to this realization and he's heartbroken by it. And he immediately goes to God and begins to pray. Verse 4. As soon as I heard these words, I sat down and I wept and I mourned for days. And I continued praying and fasting before the God of heaven. So he sits down and he prays and he weeps and he mourns and he prays. And for a couple months he continues that process. And one day he stands before the king. And the king says, Nehemiah, you look upset, which was a huge risk in their context. Because to be sad before the king could have you killed because it's not the guy that you go and you're like, King, I'm kind of overwhelmed right now. You know, I got an exam coming up. No, the king could just have you killed. But the king sees this, has favor with it, and he says, Nehemiah says, basically, man, the city lies in ruins and it's my people. And king, would you could tell Nehemiah's in praying, he says, King, basically, would you fund and pay for it and allow me time off that I can go and I can help rebuild this wall? Now, let me tell you how dumb this was. Because for Nehemiah to ask that, this city of Jerusalem that he wanted to build the wall around was historically rebellious, incredibly rebellious. And to say, I want you, a pagan king, to take this city who has always said, our Lord, our God, our king is king. You're not king. We have a king. Sometimes it's God. Sometimes it's a person. But this is, you are not our king. And they would continually rebel. To have a pagan king pay for the military defense walls just made no sense. But the hand of God was on him. So he said yes. And so Nehemiah goes back, leads these people, has tons of timber. He kind of sneaks into the city. He travels around for a couple days, do his due diligence, and check the whole place out, come up with the plan. And so then Nehemiah is about to stand before all the people. And this is what he says in chapter 2, verse 16. And the officials, the priests, they did not know where I had gone or what I was doing. They had not yet told the Jews, the priests, the nobles, and the officials, and the rest who were to do the work. But then I said to them, you see the trouble we're in, how Jerusalem lies in ruins with its gates burned. He says, come, let's build a wall of Jerusalem that would be no longer suffer derision. He says, come on. We can all do this together. If we all pitch in, we can build this wall. Any one of us, man, it'll be an impossible task. But if we all join together. And I told him of the hand of my God that had been upon me for good, and also of the words that the king had spoken to me. And they said, let us rise up and build. So they strengthened their hands for the good work. So Nehemiah says, let's build it. They said, sweet, we're in. So they start building. Now, tons of pushback. Sometimes it was from the outside, from kind of the people around them who said, we don't want them to actually have any type of power, any type of might. And so that's, let's not do that. Sometimes it was the people internally who were doing a bunch of tax stuff, and they were levying a bunch of high interest rate loans to the people and basically taking advantage of them. There's a ton of stuff that was happening in their context. And Nehemiah has to continually push back. But miraculously, this thing had been down for decades and decades and decades, and they rebuild the wall in 52 days. Look at the reaction in chapter 6. So the wall was finished on the 25th day of the month of Elul in 52 days. And when our enemies had heard of it, all the nations around were afraid, and they fell greatly in their own esteem. I love this because they see the work of God, and the nations around, all of a sudden, they become a little less secure in what they think. They become a little less secure in what they believe. Because they see it and they say, God must have done that. For they perceive that this work had been accomplished with the help of our God. Now, that's interesting. But when I heard this next part, this is what made all the difference. Because the nation who had been continually rebellious, who in addition to that rebellion had been put in time out, and then sent back into the city, who, even though they had been in timeout, still did not prioritize building the temple of God, nor did they prioritize the law of God. Nehemiah shows up and says, I'm going to help meet the functional needs of the city. The city's walls lie in ruins. Well, Nehemiah, there's nothing much that spiritual about building a wall. That's like saying there's something incredibly spiritual about digging a ditch. Nehemiah would say, just wait. Because they build this wall and they begin to celebrate in this big ceremony. Chapter 8, verse 1, and this is where for me it all started to click and kind of come together when I heard this part unpacked. It says, and all the people, they gathered as one man around the square before the water gate. And they, get this, the people told Ezra the scribe to bring the book of the law of Moses that the Lord had commanded Israel. So every other time, it's hey, we want to do something, here's the temple. We want to do something, here's the law. We want to do something, here's the temple. We want to do something, here's the law. Nehemiah says, hold on. Here's what I want to do. Let's build the wall around the city. And when we do that, what will actually happen, what actually happened in this is the people basically said, we have seen what you've done. Now we want to hear what you have to say. Nehemiah reflected God to a city in very functional, very practical ways. He reflected God to the city in a way that drew the city to God. So here's the vision of our church. We want to be a church that reflects and serves the functional needs of the city in such a way that it draws the city to God. But if you're here and you're kind of on the periphery and on the fence and you're not really sure where you are, isn't this true? That a big reason why you're hesitant, a big reason why you're skeptical, is because Christians did the opposite of this. They didn't love and they didn't serve. No, what they did is they just said, this is what you have to believe. And you saw that, and you saw how they actually lived. You saw that they didn't love. You saw that they actually didn't serve. And so somewhere along the way, you started to connect the dots, and you started to wonder if they actually believed what they believed. But not in this city. In this city, Nehemiah shows up. He all of a sudden starts doing incredible work. The people look and they say, okay, now that we have seen, we want to hear what you have to say. In fact, not just for a little bit. So Ezra the priest brought the book of the law before the assembly, both men and women, all who could understand what they heard, on the first day of the 7th month. And he read from it facing the square before the water gate. From early morning until midday. Some of us are like, bro, how long is church lasting? Because I'm a little bit hungry. Like all day, they just stood and listened to. Can you imagine, like, all right, Deuteronomy chapter 27, you know? Genesis chapter 42. And they're just listening. Why? Because they had been served in such a way. They had seen God in such a way that the outside people all of a sudden became less confident in their belief, and the inside people began to return to God. And all the ears of the people were attentive to the book of the law. I love this. And here's honestly what set kind of our church in motion from the jump was that we started thinking and praying and saying, man, God, like what is it that you want to do? How is it that you want us to look? And I started reading and praying and reading and praying. And Isaiah 58 was a chapter for me that just left off the page because I became so convinced that as churches, man, we compete over the stupidest things, like the dumbest things. Like, it's, oh no, our worship is better. No, our worship is better. Man, y'all both sing freaking Chris Tomlin. Or like, what do y'all sing now? Not Jesus Culture. What's the Mav City? Bro, you only sing Mav City when you are repenting. I just want you to know that. It just lasts too long. So we're like, what? It's true, I think. Anyways, we it's that kind of stuff, or who has the best communicator, or who has the most clever, sermon or sermon series title. That's what we went with Romans 8, by the way. I was like, I can't do this and just, whatever. So we compete over silly stuff, right? And basically what every church is trying to figure out is how do we let our light shine? How do we let our light shine? How do we do this thing gathered together in a way that actually reflects Jesus and people notice? And so we're competing over the wrong stuff. Isaiah says it this way. Isaiah, who's a prophet, Old Testament, speaking to the people of God. Chapter 58, starting at verse 2, he says, yet they seek me daily And they delight to know my ways, or at least it looks like it, as if they were a nation that did righteousness and did not forsake the judgments of their God. They ask me for right judgments. They delight to draw near to God. In other words, it looks like they're just sitting there wanting to know God. Say, God, we want to draw near to you. Why have we fasted and you see it not? This is them talking to God. Why have we humbled ourselves and you take no knowledge of it? And they look and they say, God, it seems like we're going. It seems like we're showing up. It seems like we're sacrificing. It seems like we're at the festival, God. I was in the handbell choir. I mean, you saw that, right? And God, I went to community group. And God, I haven't started Project Tallahassee. I mean, God, you've seen me, right? You've seen what I've done. How I've sacrificed, how I've given. I mean, God, I'm a college student. I make $400 a month. I give 45. He says, behold, in the day of your fast, you seek your own pleasure and you oppress all your workers. Behold, you fast only to quarrel and to fight and to hit with a wicked fist. Fasting like yours this day will not make your voice be heard on high. He says, is such the fast that I choose a day for a person to humble himself? Is it to bow down his head like a reed and to spread sackcloth and ashes under him? Will you call this a fast, a day acceptable to the Lord? He says, no. Is not this the fast that I choose? To loose the bonds of wickedness, to undo the straps of the yoke, and to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke? Is it not to share your bread with the hungry and bring the homeless poor into your house? I mean, it's just saying yes to a blue Gatorade and meeting a guy named Bill. That when you see the naked, you cover him and not hide yourself from his own flesh or from your own flesh. In other words, you don't see that and say, oh man, I know I should probably expose myself. I know it's there. It's just easier not to look. He says, when you do that, then shall your light break forth like the dawn. Your healing shall spring up speedily. Your righteousness shall go before you. The glory of the Lord will be your rear guard. Then you shall call, and the Lord will answer. You shall cry, he will say, here I am. If you take away the yoke from your midst, the pointing finger and the spreading wickedness. He says, if you want to know, this is how it's done. You just begin to love. You just begin to serve. You just begin to step up. You just begin to step up and see these people are marginalized. We need to pay attention. We need to do something about this. We need to love. We need to serve. And I love how it kind of pinnacles. In verse 10 it says this, that if you pour yourselves out for the hungry and satisfy the desires of the afflicted, then, conditional, if you do that, pour yourself out for the hungry, pour yourself out for the needy, then shall your light rise in the darkness, and your gloom be as the noonday. In other words, when you actually begin to love and to serve people, it's the craziest thing congregationally and communally. All of a sudden, people start to see that, and they start to say, that's different. And when I say that, I want to be clear about this too, because you guys know me, like, we want to be a church of individuals, of every person saying yes to Jesus, and yes, God, Gatorade, of course. You want me to go love you, you want me to go help you, you want me to go serve you, you want me to have a conversation? Of course I'll do all that stuff. Oh, you're a single mom, you need a place to stay? We've got extra room in our house. You're more than welcome to stay here where you're getting back on your feet and thinking you're kind of, getting where you need to be. And we can all do that individually, or some version of that individually. But communally, what if instead of saying the single mom, yeah, you can always stay at my house, what if we could help her to not ever have to stay at our house again? Instead of saying, here, you can have a seat at our table. Here, we want to give you the tools and the gifts and the abilities to go and build your own table. And I would love to come to dinner some point. I want our church, this is the best way I can describe it. This is the best way I can describe what I want to see us do. And this is so, if you know me, I say things with a lot of intention with words like this, and they also make no sense at all, okay? So I just want you to know that. I want to wage intelligently aggressive guerrilla warfare against oppression on the South Side. Intentionally aggressive. I want to be very, 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 very intentional. We want to understand that we have a tendency to come into places as Christians, and instead of making things better, we make things worse. Instead of empowering, we actually enable. We actually create systems of dependency, and helping can oftentimes hurt. Charity can oftentimes be toxic. So we want to say, how can we actually help to empower you? How can we, instead of just saying, okay, yes, we love, okay, yes, we care. What if on the South Side we said, hey, there's a bunch of students who love the grind mentality and the hustle mentality, and what if we, in partnership with some folks from FSU, maybe the entrepreneurship school, we got some of those people that started working here or going here. We've got some professors that started going here, business school. What if we started an entrepreneurship program at Rickards and we actually had something where people learned how to create and develop a business? Because you know what you do in that? If you've ever started a business, if you've ever run anything, you manage things, you know what you're actually dealing with? Yourself. And you know what you need? Coaching. You know what we call that? Discipleship. And so what if through the mechanism of entrepreneurship, we were helping people to unlock and uncover the gifts and the skills and the ability, but in a way that also develops the level of emotional intelligence and self-awareness? We started meeting with people, because we're serious about this. This is the intelligent part. We met with the mayor not too long ago to just say, hey, will you let us know what are the needs in our city? What are people doing? This last week, Early's Diner, right across the street, we met with their chief of staff to say, here's all the names and the information from the conversations that we had, but also, what do you think? Her name's Courtney. She's brilliant. She said, I think the biggest problem on the South Side right now, which she is very passionate about, is mental health. We said, man, what if with that, and if you guys don't know this, then you just know that I was the most atrocious student in high school. Like, I would put my GPA against anybody's. I had 4 Fs and 3 Ds my first 9 weeks. I was academically ineligible for all sports for the first 2 years of high school because it took me that long to dig out of a hole. I graduated with about a 2.1, okay? It's a miracle that you guys are at church right now listening to me. Couldn't play sports, so I boxed in Frenchtown for 5 years, 4 years in high school and my first year of college. And you know what? I would love to start a Southside boxing gym. You want to know why? Because, number one, if mental health is a thing, then you're taking kids, you're taking especially a lot of boys who have a ton of frustration and aggression, and rightly so, by the way, and you're helping to discipline in the sport and the power and the science and the mental battle of boxing. And so what you're actually doing is putting them in there because you're going to actually have to deal with yourself, because at some point you're going to get punched in the face. I'm not talking about like metaphorically life hits you in the face, but like you're literally getting squared up in the noggin at some point. And how do you respond? How do you work through that anger or that fear? Because there's something unique about the athlete and the coach relationship. Or what if we realized that, man, one of the cheat codes of our generation is coding, and we had all of our kids who were part of the HOPE program, and they were to come in and they were to learn some coding skills so much so that they could develop them so much so that the beautiful part of it is it's a meritocracy. If you can code it, Google will hire you. We can create generational change. Now, any one of us individually, maybe you can just bankroll a coding academy. I don't know, but I can't. Yet. Gonna sell some more sausage, am I right? And then, when we do, by the way, here's what I actually want to do. Because we want to help kid, of course. But what if we could create generational change from mom who's working 35 hours a week at a minimum wage between 2 jobs, making $9.50 an hour, trying to piece together, and she's doing her best. And she just has such a difficult time. And her kid's going to face so many strategic, systemic hurdles and obstacles. But what if we could take her and say, Mom, for the next 6 months, we have a way to do an evaluative measure to know if you are the type of person that you have the resiliency and the capacity to be able to code. We could put you through a 6-month thing where you're hireable to make 60 to 70 grand at the end of it. And we can actually change the trajectory of your life and your family. I love soup kitchens. And feeding people is massively important. But I want to be intelligent about change, and I want to be aggressive with it. I want to find the people. I heard of this program. I thought this was so beautiful. They went to an elementary school. It's the lowest income, below the poverty line, Title I school, and they said for kids who are 3rd grade or under, we want to work specifically with kids who are single mother, head of household, living at or below the poverty line, who have faced verbal, physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. And we want to surround those kids that are the most vulnerable of the most vulnerable. That's the kind of church I love how Isaiah finishes this. He says, when you do this, when you pour yourselves out for the hungry, satisfy the desires of the afflicted. Verse 11, and the Lord will guide you continually. He will satisfy your desire in scorched places and make your bones strong. You shall be like a watered garden, like springs of water, whose waters do not fail. In other words, we get to the point where we're constantly living for Jesus, constantly pouring ourselves out. We constantly have to be plugged into Jesus. He's pouring into us, and we feel it. It's the fresh life. And your ancient ruins shall be rebuilt. You shall rise up the foundation of many generations. In other words, this isn't just an us difference. This is a generational change. And you shall be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of streets to dwell in. And honest to goodness, I read that before, and I wouldn't even plan on including verse 12, but I thought to myself, what is a restorer of a breach? I love how NIV puts it, because it just puts it in real common people terms. It puts it in like, academically ineligible for 2 years type of terms. It says this, your people will rebuild the ancient ruins and will raise up a generation or an age-old foundation. You will be called repairer of broken walls. What if the reputation of our church was one where we didn't ask if we didn't exist, would the community miss us? What if the reputation of our church is one that, man, they so love and they so serve that if they didn't exist, the community would riot? Because they just added so much value. And the whole time we were saying, no, we do. Man, we're trying to add value every way we can. We're trying to love you. We're trying to serve you. And we don't expect anything from you. But you want to know why? It's because we have been loved and we have been served by a God who gave everything for us, though none of us deserved it. And so what we're doing, man, we're not good people. We're just beggars telling other beggars where we found bread. We're just doing for you what God has done for us. I love how Jesus puts it. He says, man, the people are going to know that you're my disciples by the way that you love one another. Also, Matthew chapter 5, Jesus giving the Sermon on the Mount, this is the last verses we'll go through. He says this, he says, you're the light of the world. Matthew chapter 5, verse 14, you're the light of the world. He says, a city on a hill, it can't be hidden, nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. Now, we always all know, like, this little light of mine, right? That's these vibes. In the same way, let your light shine before others. Well, what does that look like? I'm glad you asked. So they may see your good works. They see the way that you live. They see the way that you love. They see the way that you serve. And give glory to your Father who is in heaven. Let me tie this whole thing together. God so loved, he gave, and he gave us everything, and he served us in the most extraordinary, inexplicable way when he gave Jesus on the cross. And because of that, we love and we serve in every room that we walk into. But when we come together, we do it for strategic purposes and objectives that we want to change our city by loving and serving the poor and the marginalized. Be a voice for the voiceless. To spend ourselves on behalf of the poor and the needy. And the reason why last week was so important is because, to be really honest, over the next year, this is not going to look a ton different. And here's why I say that. The entire next year, it's planning and developing infrastructure. It's planning and developing infrastructure. Because if we went and did that right now, here's what I know. I can get pretty hyped up. I can get pretty jacked up, and I can get some people excited. Be like, let's go. Let's do it. But did you know we already have a HOPE program? We bring in kids from South City, and we mentor them one-on-one. And did you know we already have a waiting list of kids and not enough mentors to do it? Why would we go do more when we can't even do what we're doing here? Come on, church people, you get me, and especially skeptical people, you get this too. You know what happens when we serve out there but not in here? We're hypocrites, and we're unsustainable. Why would we bring on additional staff to go do out there when we can't even go do in here? And it's not even all in here. I mean, we're already adding additional outreach ministries. But it makes no sense for us to say, Here's all the things we're going to do if we're already stretched too thin. We already can't pay for ourselves, and we're already not serving within our walls, because then that just turns us into people who are doing it in the streets but not doing it at our own house. And when we do that, we're just hypocrites. And I want to be a part of a church who just says, God, we give you everything. Jesus, we give you everything. I would do anything for you. You give everything for me. And I am so in love with you, God, because you did so much for me. You died for me. You know me. You give me life, and you give me freedom, and I can be your son or your daughter. And God, would you help me to reflect you in a way that draws people to you? And our prayer is that this start of the gospel, that God so loved us, he gave everything for us, would just flow into everything else. And for the next year, man, we're going to learn to serve together. We're going to learn to be generous together. We're going to learn to love God together. We're going to learn to grow together. And we're going to continually do that in incremental ways out there. But this time next year, we want to be in a position where we are ready, where we have all of the thoughts, all of the ideas, all of the metrics, all of the concepts together, and we're starting to go be intelligently aggressive. Waging guerrilla warfare means that we're going deep to do the things that no one else will do, because that's what it takes to be light to a city. That city's walls laid in ruins for almost 100 years, and all of a sudden one guy came in and said, let's rebuild it. What if we're that one guy? What if we're that people? But not because we are, but because we said, God has done this for me, and how could I not do this for the world? So here's where we're going to end this whole series. What's the vision of our church? We want to be a group of people that reflects God to our city in a way that draws our city to God. We want to be a church that displays God to our city in a way that draws our city to God. That people would step back and say, I've seen what you've done. Now I want to hear what you have to say. And when we share the gospel, you know what they just kind of internally say? That makes sense. It makes sense. I've seen that in your life. I've seen the way that you gave everything. You served. See how selfless you are. See how you forgive. That makes tons of sense. Wouldn't that be different? On the last night before Jesus died, he got his closest disciples together, had a big Last Supper, and he said at the end of it, this is my body, which is going to be broken for you. And this is my blood, which is going to be shed for you. I want you to take, I want you to eat, I want you to drink. I want you to do this in remembrance of me. A remembrance of the fact that his love would pour out. His body would be broken and his blood would be shed, but it would be done for us. Don't you see this? This is why our culture sucks. Because our culture tells us we're not really that bad. And if we're not really that bad, then God's love really isn't that great. And if God's love really isn't that great and I'm not really that bad, then God really didn't serve me that much, so I don't actually have to serve you that much. Because I haven't really been served. I've just been, well, if I deserve it, I've just been compensated. But when I realize, God, I don't deserve any of this, and you gave everything, man, when that sinks into your heart, you can't not love and serve the people around you. So we're into this series by just simply taking communion together. His body which was broken, his blood which was shed. And I'm just praying that God helps us to be overwhelmed by his love in such a way that we begin to reflect him. We begin to serve the people around us. We pour ourselves out. We reflect God to our city, and our city is drawn to God. And I pray that people see us and they say, man, that looks that actually looks like Jesus. Let's pray together.